Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. And we're recording interviews today at MLA Rick Glumac's office in Port-Moody, and we are on the ancestral and stolen lands of the Coquitlam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Musqueam, Stolo, Katzie, Kwantlen, and Kakite peoples. So today we're joined by MLA Rick Glumac himself. So thank you so much, Rick, for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Glad you guys could come in today.
Well, it's been a little while since we've talked, so I think we've got a lot of catching up to do, and I hope you don't mind if we just jump right in. Something that I think we could start off with is the Clean Energy Act. If you could just maybe give us a reminder of what that act is, and then we'll go on from there.
Sure. Well, the Clean Energy Act was brought in 2010 under the BC Liberal government. It's kind of a dark time for our province in a way for me. I mean, it actually got me involved in politics.
So what was dark about it?
Well, the government was it was trying to change the way energy was produced in British Columbia, kind of moving away from BC Hydro producing energy, publicly, owned energy, to kind of privatizing energy production. And so at the time, this was in the midst of a lot of changes provincially. They
sort of a general move towards privatization.
In my experience, that's kind of what was happening there. And then, but you had this concept of these independent power projects, the run-of-river projects that they wanted to put in place. And they were privately owned, and some of them, in my opinion, were not very environmentally sound. I participated in the time in a number of environmental assessment meetings to call attention to some of the issues with some of those projects. But so the Clean Energy Act came out of all of that, and it kind of changed the role of the Utilities Commission and everything. At the end of the day, a number of these run-of-river projects, these independent power projects, were funded in these very, very expensive contracts that BC Hydro basically had to take. And when you look back on it now, the government did a study in 2019 and looked at what was the result of all of that. And it ended up being, it cost everybody, every ratepayer in the province about $200 a year extra to fund these projects. And what was interesting about that is that the energy that was produced in those projects was not even really needed by British Columbia because it was intermittent. It was focused more in the spring, and we needed energy in the winter. And
so what happened to that energy that was produced?
Well, I think a lot of it was exported. Yeah, so it when you look at over the course of a 20-year contract for these projects, it cost every household like around $4,000. So it was quite expensive, and yeah, there was one particular project at the Upper Pitt River, the last non-industrialized watershed in the Fraser Valley.
There's a lot of opposition to
a lot of opposition, and they did decide not to do that one because there was that's what kind of motivated me to get involved in politics. I'm like, how can a provincial government be doing this kind of stuff, and
something that doesn't make sense to an environmentally minded person.
Environmentally, fiscally, it just was not. There was a lot of experts at the time that were pointing to like this, this is not the right approach, and it just barreled ahead kind of thing. So we've taken a much different approach. Like if you look at, we've been able to do cuts. We have a tax credit at BC Hydro, $100 this year. We've kept rates flat. A much better job at managing that. We're doing a new power call coming out now with broadening that out to other forms of clean energy like solar and wind and all of that. So I think we're in a good place now.
Well, it sounds like a lot of progress has been made on that front. Can we talk a little bit about Burrard Thermal Generating Station? Now, I know I believe it was 2021, there was an amendment made to the Clean Energy Act which took Burrard Thermal out of BC Hydro's heritage assets. Can you speak to why that was done and what's the plan for Burrard Thermal?
Yeah, so Burrard Thermal was shut down in 2016, I believe, just before we became government, and it wasn't shut down in a way that it could be reopened. It was basically permanently shut down.
So decommissioned.
Yeah, but not decommissioned so that it could be brought back. Like it wasn't intended to be brought back, and so to restart any of those turbines at this stage or even a few years ago wasn't possible. So. When I became MLA, I really wanted to see a clean energy future at Burrard Thermal, and I met with a number of companies. I talked to the ministry, and in order to allow something else to happen on that site, a clean energy innovation of some kind or supporting that, you had to amend the Clean Energy Act to take it out of that list of heritage assets because it basically restricted what could happen there.
So it's like protected?
Yeah, just a restriction in terms of the uses there. So I actually got, that was one of the things that I helped push through is that change in that legislation. I would love to see like a green hydrogen project there or something like that. Right now, we're working with a number of First Nations and talking about the future of that site and working on an MOU with them. And so I hope that we'll have something to announce soon on that.
So that's interesting. You're talking about the future of energy, talking about green energy, and also maybe talking a little bit about reconciliation?
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you think would tidal be something that could be put in that area, or is it sort of a different plan that you have?
Yeah, well, I haven't heard about tidal in that area in particular, but if there's opportunities for that, I think we would definitely be open to it. Yeah.
So that's an ongoing project that, as you said, hopefully in partnership with some of the local First Nations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. You're president, I believe, of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do there and what your role is on that?
Well, I kind of have, my role in government is Premier's liaison to the Pacific Northwest. And so I do a lot of cross-border work. Some of my work is in that capacity, and some of it is in the role of president of Penwar. And they kind of overlap and all of that.
And is it Washington State in particular that you're working with?
Mostly Washington, Oregon. Penwar has 5 states and 3 provinces and 2 territories in it. It's a big region.
Oh, okay.
So in the states, it's Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho. Was that 5? Yeah. So there's a number of initiatives that are underway there. In my role as president of Penwar, one of the things I'm trying to do is strengthen its Canadian capacity. So it's a cross-border organization, but all the staff has always been in the U.S. So I was able to get a grant from our government of $500,000 to fund a project manager on the Canadian side, which we've hired just last month.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, so we're very excited to start looking at some projects, cross-border projects. We're working very closely with our ministries in the government, but 3 areas that we're kind of looking at right now is workforce training for electrification of our province. To make sure we have the training in place to do all the work we want to do around electrifying our province.
You're talking about EVs and
different
things.
Putting in the charging stations. We've talked about our ferries going to electric, and we need people to do this work. We need to have the capacity and the training to do that, and so that's one thing we're looking at. Another is around hydrogen. In the U.S., there was an announcement that they're going to be funding a hydrogen hub in the Pacific Northwest, the federal government in the U.S. for $1 billion. And And so we're going to look at like what effect is that going to have in our region? What are the economic opportunities there?
So you're looking for some synergies there?
Yeah, we are all kind of, our own jurisdictions, but we're all pursuing the same, very similar goals with decarbonization and looking to, move away from fossil fuels and all that. So the more we can kind of collaborate and work together, I think the more effective we'll be in achieving those goals. We all know we can't do anything alone. We have to all do the most we can to deal with climate change and everything.
I think nature doesn't look at borders the same way as we do.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe flooding and some work around that? Because in 2021, I believe we saw Sumas Prairie flooded back. Is there ongoing work or talks
There is, yeah. So we've convened, like I've been involved in this issue since the beginning. We've gone up there we've gone down there to Washington to visit some of the areas that were flooded and speak with the local representatives and other parties that are involved in trying to find a solution to this issue.
That affects both sides of the border greatly.
Yes, and so we've convened a couple of roundtables, and we've put together a framework that really didn't exist before, a decision-making framework, and we're just entering into agreements now with decision makers around that. So we signed an agreement recently with a number of First Nations on both sides of the border, City of Abbotsford and the BC and Washington government to work together. So there's efforts underway locally in Washington, and then there's sort of broader efforts on like longer term solutions on preventing this from happening in the future. So these floods should only happen every couple hundred years, but with climate change, there's a risk that could be a much shorter timeline. They had a big flood, I think it was in '91, and so they put together an international task force, and they did a lot of great work, but there was no kind of direct decision-making ability there, so nothing really happened.
You're talking about Sumas Prairie specifically?
Nooksack River, yeah, because there was a flood there before, and it would caused a lot of concern, and so people were brought together, but now I think we have a much better framework in place, and we're trying to narrow down kind of what are the things we want to do together, working together to find solutions. So.
Right. And again, you have Indigenous voices in that process?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I guess one other area that you cover under that group is transportation. Are we talking about transportation from, like train transportation from Canada down through the States? Can you speak a little bit about if there's any updates in that area?
Yeah, I mean, one very exciting opportunity for our region is high-speed rail, connecting Vancouver to Seattle to Portland. And just recently, the federal government in the U.S. has basically announced their support for that rail corridor.
So it'd be federal funding?
Federal funding, but also state funding in Washington. They've already approved like matching funding. So once they get the full funding once they get an amount of funding from the federal government, they will add to that. So the whole project's going to be very expensive, but there's already, I think, a few $100 million allocated to move it forward. So it's very exciting. It'll just be an incredible a new way of getting down to the States with reduced carbon emissions, and it'll be an economic engine for our region, like really pulling us together as a region.
So would it use like the Via Rail lines?
No,
or
it'll be
totally different?
It'll be a completely different route, I think. Yeah. In fact, I don't think they want to be close. I don't think these high-speed trains are kind of on their own.
Okay. So, and how long would it take to get to Seattle on a high-speed train?
Yeah, I think I don't remember exactly, but like in the neighborhood of less than an hour kind of thing. So
you don't have to deal with all that traffic in and out of Seattle, which can take a a good hour and a half just to get through.
Exactly. Yeah. So you'll do all the border ahead of time, all the border things that you need to do, and then get on the train and just head straight down. So yeah.
And when do you anticipate that might be operational?
Well, it'll still be a few years. We're in the early stages of this, but what I can say is that there definitely is some momentum on this, and it's pretty exciting.
Literally.
Yes, exactly. And it's very exciting. So.
Okay, so something to look forward to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I know we're kind of jumping all over the place because I feel like we have a lot of territory to cover here. Eagle Ridge Hospital. Now, it was recently, there was an expansion there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that expansion was, what part of the hospital, and just give us an update on that?
Yeah, so it's the emergency room. I think they added 39 new treatment spaces there. Some of them are also like isolated in case like there's infectious disease like COVID or something like that, which they didn't have that capacity before. And the space is many times larger than it used to be. So it's a very exciting project for, like, we with that expansion and with the urgent and primary care center that has been brought to our community.
That's in Port-Moody, close by here.
Yes. Yeah. And I personally got involved in that project to ensure that it was in Port-Moody, because there was some trouble there. It was announced to be in Port-Moody, and then they ran into some issues finding a location. So I helped with that a little bit, and so it all worked out in the end. But yeah, so we're very excited about the emergency room expansion.
Oh, that's good, because we are seeing a population increase in here, quite a dramatic. We will be over the next few years, so maybe being a little bit proactive in getting that in place. I know that there are still wait times, though. Yeah. Can you talk about why we're still seeing wait times despite the expansion, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, we're seeing across the board in a lot of different professions challenges with finding people to step into these roles. But we've done a number of things provincially to try to address this. And for example, we entered into a new contract with family physicians recently, and I think it's had a big uptake, and I think there's 500 new family doctors since February that have signed on to this.
So where have they come from?
Well, they're coming from training in universities. They're coming out of universities. Like a lot of the challenge, I think, has been that we've had doctors that are ready to go into family practice, but they've chosen a different area of medicine.
Or even being a hospitalist, because I think
Exactly.
setting up your own practice comes with so many challenges.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
And
So-
expenses.
So a lot of doctors that were trained to be family physicians and available to do that chose not to do it and went into some, but now they're choosing to do it more. So we're helping to address that problem. We're also making changes with international credentials. So we've made it easier now for internationally trained doctors and nurses to work here in BC. So especially around nurses, we've made a number of big changes, bursaries to help cover the costs of getting accredited. And we've also got a program where you can apply for like 3 different classes of nurses at the same time. Before, you'd have to do each one differently, separately. So you can, you can apply for all 3, and if you're wanting to, become a registered nurse, you can still work as one of the other categories.
So you do like a licensed practical nurse as you're working on your registered nurse.
Exactly.
And a psychiatric nurse or something, all in
Right.
the same.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I know
Yeah.
it was frustrating because a few years ago I worked a lot in Ottawa, and quite often the taxi drivers would be engineers and doctors and medical staff, but they were stuck, right?
Yeah.
So it's good to see that there's some movement on that, and that those opportunities are being allowed now.
Yeah.
Another area is pharmacists, and I think they've been given a little bit more responsibility now, and I know pharmacists are highly trained, and quite often they're the most knowledgeable people when it comes to drugs and pharmacy issues. Can you tell us a little bit about how their responsibilities have been sort of expanded and what they're able to do now?
Yeah, so pharmacists now can do prescriptions for minor ailments and contraception, and so we recognize that for things like that, that'll remove a lot of the barriers for people in terms of having to go to your family doctor to get a simple prescription for something. It just takes that burden off of just bottlenecking everything on one person. And in fact, a lot of what we're doing with healthcare is a team-based approach now. So at the urgent and primary care centers, it's very much a team-based approach. Sometimes you don't always need to see the physician. There's other members of the team that can assist with a lot of issues that people are facing, and work together on that, and it helps free up those resources. So we're still in the early stages with our urgent and primary care centers, but allowing our pharmacists to do this is part of that effort. So
it seems like maybe their skills were underutilized, so making a little bit more efficient use of that. Are there plans to expand that and give them even more responsibilities, or is that something that is in the future still?
Yeah, we'll see where that goes, but I think in general, we want to distribute this work as much as we can. In fact, there's a new category of healthcare worker called an associate physician, I believe, which also helps facilitate. It's a lower sort of bar of training that, but it's very, very helpful in terms of assisting with doctors in a lot of the areas that
the routine.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about affordability? We've all been kind of feeling the extra crush of the rise in cost of living. What is the government doing to sort of ease that burden and help affordability to residents in the Tri-Cities?
Yeah, so there's so many things we're doing on affordability. I had to write a few of them down because there's just so many. So let me just preface this by saying, with our government, we're taking a different approach with taxes and things like that. Before, I think with the previous government, all these costs would be buried in every, we had MSP fees, we had bridge tolls, we had all these things that added up, and it really, they didn't call them taxes.
So maybe we had lower taxes that we were paying, but we were actually paying them other ways.
Well, and the irony is we didn't have lower taxes. We actually today, for a family, for a family of four making $60,000, they pay 60% less provincial tax today than they did under the BC Liberals. For a family of four making $80,000, it's 43% less, and this is significant.
It is for that income level too. That makes a huge difference.
Well, and this is what we are trying to, help families, people that need assistance, and not trying to just nickel and dime every little. Because there were so many fees before that were not tied to kind of very well to income level, and people had to pay these fees, and it added up. And so today we've lowered the provincial tax for lower income in particular, but across all income levels. And then we have $900 climate action tax credit for a two-parent family that's come in, a $400 BC affordability credit, $500 now in your ICBC insurance, it's $500, average of about $500 a year lower, plus there's ICBC rebates now. When you contrast to where that was at under the BC Liberals, where they were like ICBC was almost insolvent. They were taking so much money out of it to balance the budget that it became almost to a point like it's going to go.
They were dipping into
Yeah,
that.
it wasn't working anymore. Now it's working. And you're saving money. $100 BC hydro tax credit I mentioned before, the BC family benefit.
These are all tied to income.
Yeah,
level.
most of these are tied to income. I mean, yeah, most of these, some of these. And we also, keep in mind, we also brought in legislation for 5 paid sick days, and that.
Yes, that's huge.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
if you were in a situation where you had to deal, you were not feeling well, you basically lost income on that day for a lot of people, and that adds up as well. We have a renter's tax credit, $400. We have a minimum wage in BC that is the highest of any province in Canada. And then, you know, all these other things we're talking about, like we have.
Can you talk about childcare?
Exactly, childcare. So I think there's something like 30,000 new childcare spaces in BC since 2018 that we brought in. Almost half of that.
That's a very stressful, trying to find childcare sometimes. So.
Yeah, and we still have a long way to go with that, but we've made significant strides. You know, family with the affordable childcare benefit, families are saving like $1,600 a month on that now, and then we have the $10 a day childcare spaces. There's about almost 13,000 of those across BC right now.
Because I remember back in the days of having to worry about childcare, being a student, and every month we would go into the red and just hold our breath, and then the next month we'd start over again. And then there was a cut in daycare that came into place, and it was through the BC NDP government, and it was a small amount, and it made all the difference. We didn't go into debt every single month, and it's just like the stress that it takes off families. I think you can't put a price on that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all very valuable work. Right?
So when I said before around, you know, with a family of 4 making 60,000 pays 60% less, that's taking into account all of these things, right? When we add up all of the tax credits and the savings, you know, families that are at a lower income level or medium income level are doing much better today. And I know we're facing challenges like globally with inflation, and you know we went through COVID, and that had a huge effect on our economy and everything. But you know, we're really hoping that you know we can work together with people in this province to address these issues.
Well, even when you're talking about those 5 paid sick days, it's actually probably makes a lot of fiscal sense too, because you're not having people going into work being sick, and then everybody else gets sick, and then you have so many more people off that it makes sense, right?
Exactly.
So it's not just a gift,
Yeah.
it's responsible.
Yeah, I mean, we want people to know that, you know, we're in your corner, basically. We're here. We hear the struggles that people are having. We're undertaking a number of initiatives to address some of these issues. And you know, there's a lot of work we still need to do, but you know, I feel like we're going in the right direction. And I think there will be a lot more in the coming months to.
Always
we're
more
talk
that
about.
can be done.
Yeah.
Can we just maybe wrap up with one final question? And I know we could probably talk all afternoon about this, but I'll ask you just if you can give us an update on the environmental front on some recent announcements that the BC NDP government made with respect to environmental protection. Can you just maybe touch on that and give us a brief update?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you know, a few years ago, we undertook efforts to protect old growth forest, and I think 2.4 million acres of forest were deferred at that time. So we're working, again, very closely with First Nations on this. So if we're in a First Nations territory, we're working with them to determine how to do this. And to help with this effort, we just recently announced a new $300 million conservation financing mechanism. So again, working with First Nations, we can identify opportunities to conserve sensitive ecosystems, old growth forests, and this funding will help to make sure that that's saved in perpetuity. So it's all part of our efforts that are underway right now to protect old growth and to implement the recommendations from the panel. So.
Right. No, and it's good news, because I think we were all kind of holding our breaths, waiting for something to happen. So it was definitely welcome news as far as environmentalists go. So, Rick, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon and for giving us so many updates. And I know we covered a lot of ground there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming in today. It was nice talking with you.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is We've Got Issues, and we've been speaking with MLA Rick Glumac.